best free throw shooter in NBA history, the player who silenced Jordan himself. They said he was too small for the league, and then his own body betrayed him in one of the cruelest ways basketball has ever seen. In the decisive game of the season, his legs literally gave out beneath him, and not figuratively. His stats lie. The numbers don't show half of what was taken from him. And his team's decision is still called one of the coldest in franchise history. Despite everything he did for the league, he remained an outsider to the Hall of Fame. Watch to the end. You'll find out why. Cleveland, 1986. A kid walks onto the court, 5'11", the kind scouts usually overlook entirely. They tell him to his face, too slow, too skinny, not built for the real league. If you enjoy, just like I do, discovering the real stories behind NBA legends, their incredible highs, tragic downfalls, and the little-known facts that are rarely talked about today, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps the channel grow and makes new videos possible. Thank you. Now, let's continue. Just a few years later, this same kid would hold a record that wouldn't be broken for decades. And then the league would take away everything it could take from him, except one thing: the respect of those who saw him play. This is the story of Mark Price, and if you watch to the end, you'll understand why his name should be spoken alongside NBA legends, but instead, it's spoken much more quietly than it should be. He was born in Oklahoma, in the small town of Bartlesville, into a family where basketball wasn't a hobby, but a way of life. His father, Denny Price, coached the high school team, later worked as an assistant at the University of Oklahoma, and then for a professional club. His younger brother, Brent, would also grow up and make it to the NBA, playing more than 10 seasons in the league. At home, they played ball as naturally as they breathed, from morning till night, from early childhood, without days off. But family upbringing alone wasn't enough to convince college scouts to take this kid seriously. Almost no one wanted Price. Too short for a guard with his level of ambition, no explosive athleticism, none of the things teams usually look for in a future big league star. He ended up at Georgia Tech, far from the most obvious choice for a player with his reputation. And there he began systematically destroying every prediction about him. He played there for 4 years, and in those 4 years, he silenced almost all the skeptics. Twice, he was named one of the best college players in the country. He took the Conference Player of the Year award and was named the Conference Rookie of the Year in his first season. His jersey would later be raised to the rafters of the university arena, where he once proved that being small wasn't a sentence. But college basketball is one thing. The NBA is entirely different. And there, the same story about height and speed repeated itself, as if no one had learned anything from his 4 years of college play. In the 1986 draft, he was taken only in the second round, with the 25th pick. For a future 4-time All-Star, that was almost an insult, and years later, it would be remembered as one of the most glaring scouting mistakes of that generation. Dallas, the team that drafted him, didn't even plan to work with him seriously. Price's rights were immediately traded to Cleveland, practically as spare change, in a much larger deal centered primarily on money and a future draft position. No one at the time thought that this trade would become one of the best decisions in franchise history, and the franchise itself in those years wasn't even considered a serious player on the league map. In Cleveland, Price met the players with whom he would spend 9 years of his career. Brad Daugherty at center, tall, skilled, one of the best centers of his generation. Ron Harper on the wing, and later, Larry Nance, who arrived a few seasons after a trade. The core of a team that began to grow before the entire league's eyes. A team that people started talking about as the future of the Eastern Conference. Price became more dangerous every season. His shot was refined to perfection. In free throw percentage, he would rank first in NBA history, and that record would stand for a very long time, outlasting more than one generation of sharpshooters who entered the league after his departure. He shot over 40% from three-point range throughout almost his entire career, while also distributing assists at a pace that defenses couldn't keep up with, regularly ranking in the league's top 10 in that category. Cleveland started winning like never before. The team posted franchise record winning streaks, twice reaching 57 wins in a season, a mark that wouldn't be matched for years. It seemed like this was it, the story of the little guy who was underestimated and proved to everyone that height and speed mean nothing if you have a mind and a precise shot. But this story would have a very different ending, and the first warning signs came much earlier than anyone was ready to admit. The first serious blow came just as the team reached its peak in December of one of the early 1990s seasons. A torn anterior cruciate ligament in his left knee, an injury that in those years meant not just missing a season, but a serious risk of never returning to his previous level of speed and explosive play. Surgery, months of rehab, the team without its playmaker falls apart and finishes the season with barely over 30 wins, sliding from the top of the conference to the middle of the pack. Doctors spoke cautiously back then. No one guaranteed that a small, slight guard whose entire game was built on sharpness and instant bursts of speed could ever come back the same. And here begins the true essence of Price's story. It's not about one difficult episode. It's about what would happen next, again and again throughout his entire career. He came back, and he came back as if nothing had happened. Again, tearing apart opposing defenses. Again, finding Nance under the basket with precise passes. Again, showing incredible shooting efficiency, averaging about 17 points per game with excellent percentages. Cleveland put together one of the best seasons in franchise history, reaching the conference finals. For the first time in a long while, there was a real chance to make it to the league finals. It seemed like this was the moment everything had been built for. But in the decisive sixth game of the series, precisely when the team needed his best basketball, Price played the worst game of his career. 5 makes out of 18 shots, a 99-94 loss. And the opponent standing in his way again was the team that in those years stood in everyone's way without exception, Jordan's Chicago. A year after that loss, Price would have the best season of his career, 18 points and 8 assists per game, incredible shooting efficiency. He was named to the All-NBA First Team, the lineup that included, alongside him, Jordan, Olajuwon, Malone, and Barkley. For a player 5'11", who once wasn't even wanted in the second round, this was incredible recognition, an extremely rare honor for a guard of his height and build. And a year later, he would also make the second Dream Team, which went to the World Championship and came home with gold. But that period would be the last truly healthy peak of his career, because what comes next is a completely different story. The story of a body that repeatedly refused to serve him the way it had in his best years. Over 12 seasons in the league, Price was truly healthy and productive in only 6 of them. Out of nearly 1,000 possible games, he played less than 3 quarters. Out of tens of thousands of possible minutes on the court, he actually played less than half of his allotted playing time. Knees, ankles, injury after injury, each one taking a little more than the last, and each recovery taking longer. And Cleveland's own statistics spoke louder than any words. When Price was on the floor, the team won the vast majority of games, posting one of the best records in the league with that lineup. When he was in the infirmary, the same team with the same players lost almost as often as they won with him. The difference was enormous and completely obvious to anyone following the club. He wasn't just a good player, he was the difference between a strong team and a mediocre one, between a title contender and a run-of-the-mill, middle-of-the-pack club. And his own body systematically took away his chance to prove that on the biggest stage, over and over, season after season. By the mid-1990s, Cleveland's management, which had once built the entire team system around him, began to see him differently. Not as the team's future, but as a risk that was hard to plan for year after year. Injuries in one of his last seasons in Cleveland limited him to just 48 games out of a possible 82. And soon, the man who had lifted the franchise off its knees was traded without any long sentimental goodbyes. The wanderings began. Washington, then Golden State, then Orlando. 3 teams in 3 years, 3 different systems, 3 different cities. Not a single league finals appearance, not one championship title. A player who had literally saved a backwater team from Ohio and turned them into one of the Eastern Conference's powerhouses was finishing his career as a guest in other people's systems, far from the city that had treated him almost like a native son. The end of this story was quiet. No fanfare, no farewell tour across the league's arenas, no special ceremonies in every city, as happens for the biggest stars. In 1999, on the eve of his 35th birthday, Price announced his retirement, right in the very auditorium of Georgia Tech, where he had once begun his journey. Behind him, 12 seasons, 4 All-Star games, a spot on the second dream team that won the World Championship, and a reputation as one of the greatest shooters in league history. But when announcing his departure, he didn't talk about records or unfulfilled titles. He talked about his wife expecting their 4th child, about having to move 4 times in 4 years, about his body simply no longer being able to handle that pace of life. Ordinary human words from a man who could have spoken of greatness, but instead spoke of exhaustion and family. Cleveland didn't forget him. A few months after he left the league, the club raised his number 25 to the rafters of the new arena during a special halftime ceremony. He was presented with a piece of the court from the old Richfield Coliseum, the very floor where his best years were played. And he stood there beyond the 3-point line as his number rose to the ceiling. One of his former teammates said then that if you had to choose one person to take the game-winning shot at the end of a game, it would be Price, the best shooter he had ever seen in his career. After his playing days ended, Price didn't leave basketball. He became a coach, working as an assistant at several schools, at his alma mater, and later for several NBA clubs, including Denver, Atlanta, Golden State, and Orlando, passing on to the next generation what he had learned over years of fighting against his own body. Today, if you compare Price's raw stats with those of players whose names are enshrined in the Basketball Hall of Fame, the difference doesn't seem that large. But those stats lie. They don't show the 6 seasons stolen from him by injuries. They don't show the playoff games he missed precisely when his team needed his full arsenal while healthy. Cleveland did its part to restore justice. His number 25 hangs in the arena rafters alongside the best names in franchise history. But in Springfield, in the country's basketball pantheon, there is still no place for him. And that, perhaps, is the bitterest part of his entire story. Greatness that the world never fully saw, cut short not by rivals or age, but by his own body, which betrayed him time and again at the worst possible moments. Taking away just enough to leave behind not a legend with a championship ring, but an eternal question of what could have been. If Mark Price's story moved you as much as it moved us, be sure to check out the other videos on this channel. Links to stories of other players from the same era, whose fates turned out to be no less dramatic and no less unfairly forgotten by time, will appear on screen right now.